Hey guys, this is Matt from Amateur Filmies and welcome to another video where we'll be showing off our Eureka Entertainment releases. Eureka Entertainment are a film distribution company based in the UK and they are a really great brand. They specialise in a lot of different films based on the lines that they have, such as the Masters of Cinema series and the Eureka Classics, but as I said, they have a whole wide range of films and the quality of their releases is excellent. Most of the Masters of Cinema releases, if not all of them, come with a really thick booklet inside, and the restorations are really good as well. Plus you get a whole bunch of special features. So we've got a few here that we're going to show today. Not as many as usual. This is going to be a shorter collection video just because we only have about 12 in total to show. But as usual, we love to talk about them anyway. And yeah, we hope you enjoy. So we'll jump straight into it with the first film here, which is M, directed by Fritz Lang. This is one of the oldest films in my collection, actually, given that it came out in 1931. And it's a German film about a hunt for a child murderer who is terrorizing Berlin. I have to say, prior to watching this, I was a little bit apprehensive about it because my experience with cinema from the 1930s and 40s is very limited, and so I wasn't sure whether I'd vibe with it or I'd really like the style or production or anything like that. But I have to say, I did end up really liking this because the story is extremely compelling. The acting performances are great, and I really do think it's a great entry point for people like me who might have been worried initially about getting into films that are this old, because I think it does stand the test of time. One thing in particular that I really enjoyed about the film actually was watching the police and the criminal gangs who were trying to capture this killer, watching their investigative process. I found it really enjoyable to see how much things have changed compared to nowadays where the technology is a lot different. It was really cool to see the different things they would use to gather evidence and how they would come to certain conclusions about certain events that would happen. Even though I'm really new to Fritz Lang's filmography, watching this has made me want to check out more of his films, and I can definitely highly recommend this. The next film we'll be showing is Tokyo Sonata, directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa and came out in 2008, and almost 80 years after M. I first became familiar with Kiyoshi Kurosawa's work by watching his horror film Pulse, which came out in 2001, and I quite enjoyed that, and using that as a frame of reference, I was really unsure about how he would tackle a drama, because that was the only film of his that I had seen. The plot's quite simple in that it's a drama based around a family where the father of the family, he loses his job, and this subsequently creates a lot of tension within the family. We sort of explore how the relationships between them change and alter from this one key event. Given that the film takes place from the perspective of various family members, we get to see how communication breakdown and having no transparency can really affect a family and cause dysfunction. The film goes into a lot of deeply emotional territory, and it's almost draining at points, but not in a bad way. The characters face a lot of uncertainty, and it was almost surreal to see how out of touch the family was with one another, and interestingly enough, not even just the family, but also the Japanese society that felt really out of touch. It was really weird to see how it seemed it was in like a type of free fall. The first and second act in particular were probably the strongest parts of the film. Personally, I think the third act did start to lose me just a little bit, both in the way that it was paced and how certain events were unfolding, but I thought it ended quite strong, and I'm definitely glad that I checked it out. Here we have the film Repo Man, directed by Alex Cox. This film came out in 1984 and blends a lot of cool different genres together. It's got a bit of sci-fi in it, it's got some action, some dark comedy, and overall just the originality of the tone is really what makes it really memorable. The soundtrack is really cool, has like a lot of old school punk in it, and Emilio Estevez and Harry Dean Stanton in particular were the standouts of this film. Both are really great in it, and I actually can't even remember the last movie I watched Emilio Estevez in, but this is definitely my new favourite of his. The society is portrayed as being very drab and bland, and not only is this sort of obvious through the attitudes of the various characters, but it's reinforced through a lot of the objects and like product placement stuff that they have in the film as well, which I thought was a really cool visual idea. I think just at the end of the day, it's a really cool, wacky and quirky film that some people will really like, although I can see it being a little bit divisive. I'm not 100% sure that everyone will sort of vibe with the tone and the feel of this film. It's really strange, but I found it really cool. But yeah, it's definitely one that I look forward to rewatching in the future. This is the only Eureka Entertainment release that I haven't gotten around to watching yet, and a little bit ashamed to say that because it is such a known classic, and that is Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau. I've been really looking forward to watching this with Sarah actually, and I think that this will probably be the oldest film that I've ever watched once I do get around to it, because it came out in 1922, which is pretty crazy. I cannot wait to get around to watching this. It's supposed to be a really important part of film history, and it's supposed to be a really good example as well of German expressionism in horror, which I've been reading about recently, and it sounds really cool. So yeah, hopefully it's good, which I'm sure it is. This next film is the 1972 sci-fi film Silent Running. The director of this is named Douglas Trumbull, and a cool fact is that he actually worked as a special effects artist on 2001: A Space Odyssey, so I was interested to see what kind of imagery he'd be able to shape up in this one. The main character Freeman in this film is played by Bruce Dern, and it was weird to see how young he was in this, because this film came out in 1972, and I'm so used to seeing him be an old man. I hope that's not too rude to say, but yeah, he played the role really, really well, and I think it was great casting because he did such a great job. Overall, I did quite enjoy the film. It had a lot of philosophical commentary on the state of the world and the importance of preserving and protecting the environment. I just think it was sort of let down a little bit by how there are plenty of scenes that just felt way too drawn out, and I think it could have been cut down significantly. I could be wrong, but I definitely got the impression that the director really wanted to showcase some of the special effects that he ended up incorporating into the film. There were just way too many scenes of the robots sort of interacting with each other and doing certain activities, and same with the spaceship, we would see how that would sort of do certain functions, and while it was kind of cool, I just think there were just way too many scenes of it, and it ended up sort of halting the story a little bit too much. The film is quite dated in a lot of ways as well, and so when there are a lot of scenes dedicated to showcasing effects, it doesn't really age that well. And while I personally think that sort of adds a little bit of charm to the film, it's definitely going to be something that might irritate some people who are watching this film. While I do think this is a decent movie, I think I would only ever really find myself recommending this to people who are really into sci-fi. Next up, we have a crime film from Hong Kong called Mad Detective. When I first bought this, I'd been wanting to watch some more films from Hong Kong because I hadn't actually seen that many, and overall this one is an okay one. The film is about two police detectives who are hunting down a serial killer, so pretty basic plot, but it differentiates itself in that one of the main detectives, or rather the mad detective, he has this supernatural ability to be able to see the inner personalities of everyone around him, and he uses this to be able to help him solve crimes. First off, I do want to say that the cinematography in this is probably the best part of the film. My eyes were always hooked on it, and there are a lot of sequences that I still remember quite vividly because of how unique they were. While the mad detective was really good to watch on screen, unfortunately a lot of the other characters, almost all of them actually, were really one-dimensional and felt really disposable and such. I didn't really care about any of them. Unfortunately, they sort of felt more like a way for the character, the mad detective, to get where he needed to go or to do certain things that he needed to do. They didn't really feel like they served any other purpose than as a means of exposition. The other detective who plays his partner in this film is also the other main character. Is really forgettable and pretty much useless in the film. He pretty much just follows this guy around and lets him do what he's got to do with his special ability, and he sort of just is tagging along and not really contributing much at all. There is one other thing that I wanted to talk about regarding the detective's ability and how it affects the progression of the story. Whenever you watch films that are supernatural in some way, or sci-fi, or pretty much any film, you do suspend your disbelief, but a lot of this film hinges on this character's ability to infer certain things from these personalities that he sees. And if you don't buy into his ability 100%, the film does sort of start to fall apart a little bit. Obviously, if you can suspend your disbelief like most people can when they watch a movie, it should be okay, but the story itself relied way too heavily on his ability. I think if they sort of taken a step back and just sort of used it sparingly, it would have been a lot more effective, and then we could have seen some more traditional police work tied in with the supernatural aspects. But as I said, all these characters were just sort of waiting for him to come up with these crazy conclusions, and then they would just go from there. With all that said, I definitely don't regret watching the film. I just think that some of the flaws in it sort of hold it back from being a great film and not just an average one, but it actually still does have a lot of rewatchability anyway, so I actually probably will see this one again in the future, and it has a lot of other enjoyable aspects to it that I didn't get time to talk about anyway. So I'd say if you've been wanting to watch some more films from Hong Kong and you like crime stories, maybe give this one a try. You might like it more than I did. Eureka Entertainment from time to time actually does steelbook releases, and this is the one that I have. This is Francis Ford Coppola's Rumblefish. This actually has a crazy amount of famous actors in it, and I'm just going to quickly read them off because I don't want to forget any. You have Matt Dillon, Diane Lane, Mickey Rourke, Nicolas Cage, Lawrence Fishburne, and Dennis Hopper. An all-star cast. While not quite as quirky, like Repo Man, this is a uniquely stylized film. It actually has a type of film noir feel to it, and it's shot in black and white and actually based off a book of the same name. There's some really cool moments in this film, like not far into the movie there's a big gang fight that's choreographed really well, and there's also a dreamlike sequence where Matt Dillon's character, he actually floats up and over across the town visiting people. It's shot really awesomely. Earlier I mentioned that this was a very stylized film, and that definitely bleeds over into the dialogue and the wardrobe choices as well. And watching this really reminded me of some of the other youth gang movies that I really liked from the 1970s, like The Warriors and The Wanderers, although this film is definitely quite different to those. But yeah, really one to check out. This next film is a Japanese movie from 1964, and that is Onibaba. This film is a horror film, although not necessarily in the traditional sense. There are a lot of scary parts in it, but I would sort of think of it more as a historical drama, and we sort of see how the horrors of that specific era can directly impact a character. The film is about two women who kill samurai and sell off their belongings as a means to stay alive, and there a lot of tension begins to grow when one of the women starts to have an affair with the neighbor, and it sort of compromises this sort of way of living that they have already established. It feels very morose at times, and the film really explores the inner turmoil of these characters in quite a devastating way. You get to see how these characters are driven to desperation and have to do terrible actions just to get by. Not only that, but the really slow burn disintegration of this sort of relationship between the two women culminates in like a really deeply emotional ending, which I thought was really, really memorable. In talking about this film, I knew that I wanted to mention the setting of the film because I thought it was a really, really great choice for what they were trying to execute here. The characters live in these type of huts that are surrounded by these giant tall reeds, and it really creates a claustrophobic and isolating feeling. A lot of the horror scenes in this film take advantage of the setting, and we're left with like a lot of striking sequences that are really, really creepy and well done. This had been on my list of Japanese films to check out for quite some time, and I'm really glad that I actually did buy this and get to it because I really, really enjoyed it. Not 100% sure that everyone would like it, but I don't think I could deny that it is a great film. Here we have the brilliant Harakiri, directed by Masaki Kobayashi. Apart from knowing how good this film is, the main reason I wanted to check it out is I wanted to experience another samurai film that wasn't directed by Akira Kurosawa to sort of expand my horizons a little bit, and what a great one to start with. I think it's worth mentioning that while this is a samurai film, there isn't a whole lot of action in it. There is some, but this film focuses more on telling like a slow burn story where like little details slowly and gradually are released over the course of the duration. And as the story unfolds, it just builds an unbelievable amount of tension, and it really, really makes you as the audience member want to know what's happening next, and you really want to know where the story is going. A lot of the scenes in this movie felt very still and deliberate, but at no point did it ever feel like it was dragging. That was like a combination of how the film was shot, the strength of the actors, and as I've mentioned already, how compelling the story was. One thing that I really liked about this film, and was a personal point of interest, was how the samurai code and ethics was weaved into the story itself, and I got to see how it would directly affect the characters' actions, because the code and ethics of the samurai plays a major role in how this story is told. And so if you have any interest in the samurais at all, or that part of history in Japan, I think this is a really, really cool way of seeing how that might have played out in a certain way, if that makes sense. If you can't tell, I'm highly recommending this, as this is one of the best samurai films I've seen. Next up is the classic Serpico. Admittedly, I can't really remember a whole lot about this film, so unfortunately I don't have a lot to say about it. I'm desperately due for a rewatch of this film, but I do remember quite enjoying it, and I did want to check it out, obviously, because it's a classic, but it's also directed by Sidney Lumet, who I really like from his work on 12 Angry Men and Network. But yeah, I just hadn't seen this film until I first bought it. I just wish I remembered more about it, but I also wanted to watch some more of Al Pacino's earlier works. I still really want to see Cruising, which is supposed to be pretty good, and another big one that I haven't watched yet is actually Dog Day Afternoon. Yeah, it's another big classic that I'm ashamed to say I haven't seen yet, but I will watch it someday. So I mentioned earlier in the video that there was a few different lines that Eureka had. There was the Masters of Cinema line, and there's also the Eureka Classics. The last two that I'm going to be showing are both part of the Eureka Classics line. The first of which is Night of the Creeps, directed by Fred Decker. This film is just pure 80s gold. It's just a classic, and I'm sure a lot of you have already seen this. I've always enjoyed watching this film so much. It just has like a lot of rewatchability, and it's always a fun experience. And while the film is very formulaic, it's never like in a bad way at all. It's always in a way that you just enjoy seeing for the nostalgia aspect. Like, it's got the main dude who's pining after the girl, the sidekick dweeby friend who provides a comedic relief. It's got a detective who's troubled by his past. It's got all that stuff, but it just adds to the charm of the film. If you like 80s horror comedies and you haven't watched this, I think you'll really like it. It's even got like throwbacks to other horror directors, like all the last names of the characters, like reference other horror directors like David Cronenberg, Romero, Tobe Hooper, and there's a few others I think as well. But yeah, I think it would be a good pairing with other horror comedies like Reanimator, Night of the Comet, or even Return of the Living Dead. It's sort of, if you like those films, I reckon you'd like this one as well. Definitely worth a watch if you're into that sort of thing. And last but not least, we have a box set of the Stephen King adaptation of Cujo. Like a lot of people, I am a huge fan of Stephen King. I love his books, and for the most part, I like a lot of his film adaptations. Now, anyone who knows Stephen King knows that the film adaptations of his books are usually very, very hit or miss. but I grew up watching them, and as such, I even really love the bad ones as well. However, Cujo is definitely not one of those ones that is considered a bad one, at least not to my knowledge anyway. I think Cujo, the film, is actually quite decent, all things considered. The scenes in the car when they're locked up with Cujo roaming outside with Dee Wallace and the kid who plays Tad, that it's always very tense and it just freaks me out. Growing up, this movie scared me a lot, and I always felt really bad for the dog, but also scared of him at the same time. With the film adaptations of his work, I would say, as far as quality goes, it's probably pretty middle of the road. I quite like it anyway, and I've enjoyed rewatching it in the past, but it's definitely not the best film out there. There's an adaptation of his work, but it's certainly not the worst either. You can definitely do a lot worse than Cujo. Really happy that Eureka Entertainment decided to put a box set of this out. I'm really happy to own this on Blu-ray. I've been wanting to collect more Stephen King adaptations in general, just to sort of relive the nostalgia I had for them when I was growing up. But Eureka have a release out of the dark half as well, which I need to pick up. But yeah, just in general, I need more Stephen King Blu-rays. Excellent, so that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching, and if you collect Eureka Entertainment releases, let me know if there are any the essentials that I need to pick up. I think they're an excellent label, and I really do wish that I had more of them. It's just a matter of getting around to it at some point, of course, but yeah, definitely let me know what you think of the films that I've shown here, and as I said, if you have any recommendations, let me know. Thanks very much.